testing. Um, my name is David Buck. My company, Symbaron, has been doing Smalltalk programming, Smalltalk development, and consulting since 1994. So I've been at this for a little while. I've always wanted to create products to sell in addition to doing consulting. Most of my career has been consulting for clients who have Smalltalk systems, and I help them solve problems and do development. But in that mode, I'm always trading time for money. I charge for the amount of time that I spend on it, and they pay me for it. I wanted to get into a mode for a long time where I could produce a product, and then once the product is out, I don't need to trade time and money or trade time for money for that product, which might mean that the product does really well and makes a lot of money, or it might mean that the product doesn't do so well and makes very little money. But I wanted to get into that mode. Also, my history is that I like doing things that are graphical, that you can see and look at and say, wow, that's really cool. I think a few people today were surprised. Tim was surprised by the fact that I wrote DKB Trace, a ray tracer, that ultimately turned into POV-Ray. And so I did computer graphics. And with computer graphics, the net effect is that you get a really cool picture, and it's fun. And I like that fun aspect of it. So I thought I was going to get into mobile Smalltalk. I was going to create games and put up on the App Store and the Play Store and hopefully make some money on those games. So before I get into the actual talk, I'm going to give you a little bit of eye candy from, this is a fairly old Samsung tablet. I'll hold it up in a sec here. And of course, I have to get this. Okay, I'll show you this on the screen in a few minutes, but what you're seeing here was all written in Smalltalk. I'll turn up the volume here. That's what I have. This is a game I'm calling Sea Turtle Rescue. It's written in VisualWorks Smalltalk and runs on an Android device using a virtual machine that I wrote myself as an interpreter that interprets VisualWorks bytecodes. I'll just do one thing here. That solves this first level. My little turtle falls onto the ground and then gets carried away by a wave. And now I finish that level and I go on to the next level. Okay, I'll show you this in a few other forms, but that's where I am. And in fact, that program runs on Android, it runs on iOS, and it runs natively in VisualWorks on my laptop. So it runs in 3 environments. With the laptop, I haven't interfaced the sound to it because I didn't care so much about the sound, but that's not hard to do if I decide to do it. Not yet. There's an internal release version uploaded to the App Store, the Play Store. So that's not available to the public yet. Probably within several weeks, I'll be putting out an alpha version to both the App Store and the Play Store. And probably May-ish, June-ish timeframe, I'm planning a full release of this. But it's going to go through several alpha phases, beta phases. There are several things left to do. But the game itself is fundamentally done. I'll talk about the other things that need to be done shortly. Go ahead.
So when talking about alphas, can you put it on test point so that those,
Can I put it onto?
test point? The App Store has a backing thing called test point where developers can put out to a limited
Yes,
audience to download it. So it's not public, it's to whoever you grant it. And I've
correct.
multiple iOS devices, I can test it on.
Correct, yes. And if anybody's interested in being an alpha or beta tester of this, let me know. I can put your name on the list. You'll get notified when I put up a version, and you can download it and try it out.
Is it far enough along where you know that Google will allow you to even deploy it?
Yes, and Apple. The reason is that this is the second incarnation of a game that I've created. The first one was called HEXSOLVE, and that one was already accepted in the Google Play Store, was up for sale. It was accepted in the Apple App Store and is up for sale as well. So they are good with the technology and the game. The difference in this one is the whole graphics, the theme, the sound, but nothing fundamental about the game. So I'm quite confident that it will still pass everything to do with being approved for the stores. Feel free to ask any questions as I go through this. Back in 2013, I was looking around and thought, you know, the online stores are becoming pretty mature, and I'd like to get a product out there. And the nice thing about getting products out into the mobile stores is that you can very easily have lots of people download those, and you have a wide audience. It's very easy to download apps. They're popular, and you can get a fair amount of money from them. The top selling games today, or like in 2019. Now, I'm not going to say that this game will be top selling, okay? But the top selling game, the last time I checked, was Candy Crush. Any guesses on how much Candy Crush earns on a daily basis? Guess? Sorry? 10 grand?
I saw it earlier.
You saw it earlier. 1.5 million per day. Okay?
Does it use the casino model of buy more tokens or whatever?
And it's also because it's available on many platforms. It's available hooked up to Facebook. Yeah, there's a lot going for it.
So that would require embedded ads or networking or something like that.
It's all sales of extra things. Yeah. In-app purchases is how they do that. I have in-app purchases in this app. I don't expect it to be anywhere near the popularity of Candy Crush. But as you go down the list, you'll find even at the top, or the 150th most like highest revenue game came in, I think I saw it today at $1,600 per day. That's number 150. When you get down to about 200, you're talking about $30 a day. So as a game developer, you're aiming for basically that top 150 to top 100 games. If you can get in there for a while, then you've made it in terms of revenue. So we will see with this, but anyways, I'll go on with my presentation. Smalltalk had little or no presence back in 2013 in mobile applications. I told John McIntosh I was going to mention him in this presentation. Here it is. I knew he had Squeak apps that he had deployed to the App Store. He tells me as well that there was an Android version of Squeak produced after that. Pharaoh had an unstable environment for Android, but they said in the documentation online that it was unstable. And to be honest, I have been using the commercial Smalltalks for many years, and nothing against instantiations. I love instantiations, but I fell in love with VisualWorks. And VisualWorks was always my favorite environment. I did many years of work in instantiations and loved doing that. But if I was going to start a project, I think Syncom VisualWorks is going to be the one that I would like to choose. I felt that with Smalltalk, I could get a better time to market because my options were going with Java and Android or Objective-C or Swift. Swift wasn't out yet when I started this on iOS. And doing that meant that I had to code it twice. And I didn't want to write 2 different versions of every game that I come up with. So I wanted one standard system that I could use, and I wanted one GUI infrastructure that would serve both. And OpenGL ES worked on both platforms. So I thought, perfect, even if I'm not doing 3D, I can use OpenGL to put 2D tokens or icons one on top of the other and move them around and do my game. As it turns out later, I actually did use a little bit of 3D in the Sea Turtle game. That hex grid is actually a little bit in perspective. So it is actually using some of the 3D abilities of OpenGL. So I thought, okay, let me try this. I did some initial thinking about moving VisualWorks, the VisualWorks VM to mobile. And I ran into one big problem, which was dynamic compilation on iOS. On the iOS platform, they did not allow you to allocate memory that was simultaneously writable and executable. So you can create writable memory, but it won't be executable. Any executable memory you get had to be from code that was loaded by iOS, and you couldn't write to it. And that meant you couldn't do dynamic compilation. If you try taking dynamic compilation out of the Syncom VM, you've basically taken out the Syncom VM because it's all geared around dynamic compilation. So I thought, okay, I can write an interpreter for it. That's not, I mean, it's going to be a challenge, but let's do it. So I started on writing an interpreter for Syncom Smalltalk in December 2013. I wanted to be able to interpret all of the VisualWorks bytecodes, and then I could just take the VisualWorks classes that I develop in my development environment, move them across in an image to my mobile device, and just run the code there. I've already covered those last 2 points. The current state. That interpreter is basically finished. It handles all of the VisualWorks bytecodes except for one, and that one is called this context, which gives you access to the stack. And for my purposes, I just don't need that. So I decided not to implement that one. Crash, there are 2 things that happen during a crash. Number 1, my VM will capture a stack trace of the Smalltalk stack and ship that off to a web server that I have running that just provides me information of here's the stack trace, blam. And the second thing that happens is that if you're running in a development environment, it will give you a C stack trace of where you are in the interpreter that caused that problem. So the stack traces aren't handled at the image level, they're handled at the VM level. Pardon me?
As long as you get the information.
Yep. I use my own custom image format. I just came up with a format that I could transfer over to my mobile device and read in. So it's not the same image format as what Syncom uses. The interpreter is now a 64-bit application. It started off being a 32-bit application because my development started on Android. And at the time, 32 bits was perfectly fine for iOS. And then Apple went and changed their policies. Curse Apple again. And they said, oh, all applications must have a 64-bit executable. A 64-bit executable on a Smalltalk VM means the whole VM has to be switched to 64-bit. All of the object pointers have to be switched to 64-bit. it meant lots of changes to the underlying VM. So I went through and I made all those changes. Turns out that with 64 bits, you really no longer need large integers. Like, am I ever going to use integers longer than 64 bits? No, minus a few bits for
10,000 factorial. So good.
there you go. So my game will frequently be running 10,000 factorial. No. So from a practical point of view, I don't need large numbers that large, so I never had the incentive to implement large integers. So I hate to break Georg's rule, but it's the one Smalltalk that doesn't support large integers, sorry. Pardon me? Okay. Generation scavenging. I found out early on that if I'm allocating objects and I don't have a garbage collector, it doesn't take long for it to crash. So I implemented a generation scavenger for it. Later on, I started finding that some of my objects, like bitmaps, were things that I wanted to load in from files and then keep around for a long time and hopefully not move them around in memory. So I actually implemented a separate type of memory space I call image space, which uses a mark and sweep garbage collector hooked into the generation scavenger. So it still does garbage collection of it, but it keeps those objects in memory in the same spot. And then when I detect that I no longer need them, then it creates a free list of those and does it in a more conventional way. The system interface is to OpenGL ES, which works on both platforms. Wouldn't you know it, Apple has recently changed their policies and said, you know, in the future, we're no longer going to support OpenGL ES. We want everybody to switch to Metal, which is our own Apple framework. And I'm going, oh no, do I have to switch to Metal? So I haven't yet switched to Metal. I've been talking with John about that, and John is sort of like, yeah, I don't know if you really want to switch to Metal right now. So I think I'll just stick into OpenGL for a while longer. I also have a special low-level debugger that I can use through a USB port to my Android or iOS device, and I can debug bytecode by bytecode in the VM. It gives me a whole lot of hex numbers. It shows me the hex numbers in the stack, the hex numbers of the values, the interpreted values. If I say, what's the next bytecode, it shows me the next bytecode. And I'm always having to switch back and forth from VisualWorks inspectors of the compiled methods back to the bytecodes to figure out where I am in the method. But it's for low-level debugging, I can use that. And in fact, it's really quite necessary if you're going to be doing this type of debugging. And recently, I've been able to get VisualWorks itself to run the same code as what I can run on the mobile devices. And that has gotten me over the hump of difficult debugging to Android. Now it's easy debugging within VisualWorks. Let me show you that. There's my window. This is now OpenGL. Not OpenGL ES, but regular OpenGL. All the code that's running here is the same code that runs on the mobile devices, with a few little exceptions here and there. In my system, I have the ability to say, here's a method. I'm going to have one implementation for mobile Smalltalk and one different implementation for VisualWorks. And the way I distinguish them is I'll put an underscore at the beginning of the name of the mobile method, and the mechanism that I have that creates the image will strip out the underscore. So if I ever see a method that has an underscore in it, I know that's a version for mobile only, but then I can put a different version into a separate package just for VisualWorks and have a VisualWorks implementation that runs here. The very first game that I put out was called HEXSOLVE. It was the same basic game, but the graphics were nowhere near as nice as this. That original game used Pavre rendered graphics. As I tell people, it had a UI that looked like it was developed by a computer programmer because it was developed by a programmer. In this one, I actually hired graphic artists and animators to create the graphics elements for me. So as of this morning, sitting at that table right there, I put in that eye blink that my animator sent me in an email last night. So that eye blink right there is new as of this morning. I can play it. I'm going to slide the 2 over here. I capture that coin, slide the 2 down towards that 4. Notice that the 1, 4, and 3 are nailed, so they're not going to move anywhere. And now I can slide that 2 right into here, and I get the sequence 4, 3, 2, 1, which gives a path for the sea turtle to use to run towards the ocean. There's my sea turtle, drop onto the sand, and then get picked up by the wave. And there's our congratulations success screen. Again, the backgrounds are done by a professional artist, the treasure chest by a professional artist, all the icons by a professional artist, so it looks much nicer than what I could do on my own. And the great thing about it is being native Smalltalk, I could come in here and say, let's see, what can I do here? I'm going to try skip to next level. Breakpoint, skip level. I can't do that yet because I don't have enough coins. Hold on a sec. I'll put it right there. Okay, skip level, breakpoint. I'm in my Smalltalk debugger. I can go in, figure out what's there, debug, use all the normal techniques. And I don't have to try debugging on the Android device. So much easier. This is what makes this development worthwhile. I'll just proceed on that. Okay. So now I can develop much faster than I could if I was just doing development on the Android device. While we're here, I will show you a few more things. This is probably too small to see. Let me see if I can make that a bit bigger. Do editor. This is the definition of a class called object. Notice it's in the namespace Simber on Smalltalk, and its superclass is core object. So I have my own copy of the object class, and in fact that class is the superclass of a whole class hierarchy of base Smalltalk objects. I recoded most of these from VisualWorks. And you might wonder why, because VisualWorks has perfectly good implementations of them. Yes, they're perfectly good, but every once in a while you come across something which has strings attached. So for instance, I don't have any exception handling in this image, so I can't include code that involves exception handling. So there are just enough differences of things that I don't really want to pull that whole class in. Or if I even pull in individual methods, I have to pull in this, then I have to pull in that, then I have to pull in that. So I decided that just for clarity, I would just make my own class hierarchy and re-implement the methods that I need. And I'll show you one other
Why
thing.
did you make that a new subclass?
Why did I what?
This object class could have been new subclass.
Yes, but then I lose all sorts of abilities and trippy and the inspectors and debuggers and so on, right? I want to keep all the object stuff so that I can work with it well in the development environment. If I use the nil subclass, then it's really hard to debug it.
So what does this mean towards all those standard classes you might want to use, different types of numbers, collection classes, etc.? Are you using those, or you didn't resell classing, right?
If there's any visual works class that I want to use, I have to either re-implement it or copy it over in a way that I can use it here. It has to be reclassed. Sorry?
Copy it over to the Smalltalk namespace.
Yes, at the very least. And I may have to modify it there in order to make it work properly on mobile devices. Keep in mind, and I'll say this at this point, this tool is meant for me to use to develop my games and to do the things that I need to do. I had thoughts about whether I could sort of release this for other developers to use, and it's really complicated and really hard. Number one, if you're developing an Android or iOS application and want to use this, chances are you're not writing a game. So chances are you'll need access to things in the environment that I haven't interfaced to. Accelerometers, I don't interface to. The internet, Wi-Fi, I don't have interfaces to all those things, and I don't want them and I don't need them in here. So I've put in support for the things that I need, but different applications will need different things. Second, in order for other customers to use this, they have to be Syncom customers first, and then they could put this on top. So the best solution for this is basically any customer who's seriously interested in writing mobile devices, I'd be more than happy to work with them. Number one, they have to be Syncom customers. And second, to get the work done, at least to start with it, they have to go through Syncom to me. I will do consulting with them, and I'll help them develop the application up to the point where it's useful to them. But they have to be aware that there are things that are not supported yet in the application that would need extra work to support. So I'm honestly not expecting to get much business out of that, but my goal here is to make an environment that I can use to write my games. So, yeah.
So I was thinking as you're talking just now, since we have so many time spans in this room, it's interesting to think about this for just a second. So I presume this interpreter that you wrote, which is essentially a replacement for the VM, it's a parallel VM.
Yes.
You wrote that in Objective-C,
It's written in C. For iOS, there are Objective-C modules that interface it into the iOS system.
So that's sufficient. So think about this. You have a little piece of plastic and silicon, whatever, in your pocket, right? It's booting hard C and C++ code at the kernel level, but all of that Objective-C and all the frameworks, the NS frameworks, like that Apple implemented, those are all supported Objective-C.
Yeah.
That's running on a VM, right? That's already a virtualized environment, right? Now you're taking that VM environment and posing your own VM on top of it. So now when you start thinking about meta layers in terms of how much interpreting is going on, and yet incredibly responsive to have that many layers of virtualization, yet an abstraction, and yet it's still quite happily run. So I just think that's cool.
I was surprised at the kind of performance I'm able to get out of mobile devices using this mechanism. And anytime I've had slowdowns, it's been because I did stupid things. So an example of that, text used to be really slow. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but explain this. I used to use, or I do use, a library called FreeType to take characters and render text, like bitmaps from them, and then I'll put that up on the screen. What I found was that initially I was re-rendering all the text every time I refreshed the screen, and my frame rate dropped way down to almost nothing. Then I put in a mechanism where I could cache the image. Like once I draw it once, I cache the bitmap, and then just draw the bitmap thereafter. My performance came right back. So that's the kind of thing that I ran into. If I try doing things the hard way, then yeah, it slows right down. But OpenGL does a really good job at handling graphics like this. And it doesn't need much control from the Smalltalk level to make it work effectively. I'm getting around 30 to 40 frames a second on this game on the devices that I tested on, which is pretty darn good. Yeah.
You also remember also that there's a vector processing unit on all this hardware. And so I have an app where actually I show a world map, and then I have to calculate whether it's daylight or not. And so there's like 2 million pixels involved, but then there's actually cosine and sine and cotangent involved. And I get to do all that in the vector processor, and it takes like 100 milliseconds to actually do all of it. The devices are really powerful. So,
Yeah, I was surprised. I was a bit skeptical that I could do so well with a pure interpreter, but this pure interpreter is working pretty well for what I'm using it for. The basic structure, I have C code for the Android interface. For iOS, most of the interpreter is straight pure C code, but I have a few Objective-C modules that hook all that into iOS. So there's the common interpreter code that's all in C. Above that, we have the Smalltalk image that's saved as a resource from my development environment and packaged with the application. And on top of that, I have my VisualWorks development environment.
So the image is considered writable by iOS project, right? That or is it all
The image is coming across as a resource, it's readable, but then I just read that into memory, and I have compiled method objects that I can interpret. So I don't need writable executable space.
Right. So that's considered executable.
Apple is okay with an interpreter so long as all of the code that you are going to interpret is shipped down with the product when the product is installed. That's fine. I cannot have people connect to a website and download code that would then be run. That would violate Apple's rules. Yeah.
I'm going to clarify.
Okay, clarify.
The new rule is that if you're building a programming environment and it's marketed as a programming environment,
Okay.
school to teach C code or something or Smalltalk,
So if
you're
you
now allowed to have it download code from the internet.
Okay.
And that they put that in place actually for block-based languages like Scratch and so forth. So
Good for them.
You know, it's a programming tool.
Yes.
The reason that forbid interpreters originally was exactly because they were trying to create a sanitary environment, right? Right. It was the same reason why on Windows for so long we've been plagued by macros in Excel programs destroy things. They wanted to prevent that problem, so they wanted to touch any code before it got to their devices. So they saw interpreters as a link to that. But because they did, for example, split playgrounds, which that links out for, and now there's a Pascal interpreter system on there, which Pascal people really like to use on iPads and stuff. They figured out a way to kind of expand that box a little bit,
Right.
still in a fairly sanitary way. So I don't expect you to ever be able to actually run a VisualWorks IDE or whatever on an iPad anytime soon. We're not going to get that far.
Yeah.
But they have stuff.
And I'm happy to hear that they're evolving their views on this, because they were very draconian at some point, at one point. This is the very first game that I developed and released. This is actually available in the App Store and in the Play Store. You can download it and you can run it. It's called HEXSOLVE. It involves tiles and this board. And it's the same mechanics of the game for the most part. This is the one where I said the graphics look like they were created by a computer programmer, because guess what? They were created by a computer programmer using Pavre. And I also found there was a lot of text that I don't think people really want to read that much text. So this was the first game I came up with. My goal,
Game-like, but it is fun to play.
pardon me,
It doesn't look very game-like compared to professional games, but it is very fun to play.
have you tried it? There you go. Excellent, thank you very much. My goal with that game is to get a game out to the market so I know what the process is. I've had very low revenues from this game, but it wasn't intended to earn that much revenue. I wanted to learn the process. This next game is the one I was showing to you, Sea Turtle Rescue. I wanted something where I could tell a little bit more of a story with it, have a little bit more of a character. I want the icon to have some sort of happy looking face on it, so it makes it more appealing to people. I wanted more animation, I wanted more appeal. And that's where I'm heading with this one. So this is the result of not only programming work, but the work of some good graphic artists. Challenges. I already mentioned the iOS challenge that all applications have to be 64-bit. That was a pain, to be honest, switching everything over to 64 bits so that it could still run on Android in 32-bit. This tablet is a 32-bit tablet, and it still runs the game. Garbage collection was a challenge. It's one of those things where I always intellectually knew, kind of how a garbage collector worked, but never implemented one. I realized many things about how they really work when I actually put one together. So that was kind of cool, but it was tough getting a good garbage collector to work. One of the challenges I had was application development environments changing on me. When I first started developing on Android, the environment was Eclipse with SideGWin. And so you compiled with SideGWin, and the development environment was Eclipse. And then later, Android changed their default and development environment to use IntelliJ and Gradle. So I had to do all sorts of maneuvering to get the code to work again in IntelliJ and Gradle. The code itself isn't the problem. It's all of the options and build specs and all the rest. It was just a real pain to do. Interfacing to the online stores was more difficult than I had expected. I finally worked that out for HEXSOLVE and was able to get that up in the store. And that same mechanism is being used for the Sea Turtle Rescue game. So I don't expect to have very many problems getting that up in the stores as well. And I've already mentioned rendering text, that I used to use FreeType directly to render all the text. Better turn this off. As a spam caller calls me, probably saying that your Google business listing is at risk of not being displayed properly. So anyways, I've cached those into bitmaps and now they're fast. That's where I am. I'm probably a couple weeks away from getting an alpha version into the online stores. From there, I want to do a lot of play testing, get people to actually sit down and play with the game. My problem is I've been working on this game for several years now, so I've gotten to know the first 150 levels really, really well, to the point of not being able to tell whether something is easy or hard, right? I know I can look at a level and say, oh, I know how to do that one. But for anybody else to look at it, they can be easily confused, or it could be too difficult. I don't want the early levels, at least, to be too difficult, because then people will just give up on it and they won't continue on with the game. With later levels, I want abilities to provide them tools that they can use to not really cheat, but make it a little bit easier. So as the game goes on, you can earn, for instance, hammers. And hammers allow you to grab a hammer and nail down one of the tiles so it's not going to move anymore, which makes it easier to line other tiles up with it. Later on, there's the concept of a bomb, where you can take a bomb and blow up a tile. And that makes it easier to solve because now that tile isn't in the way anymore. And then later on still, there's the concept of a magnet. A magnet is something you can drop onto one tile and it will attract anything in its immediate neighborhood and stop it where it is, and it'll stick to that tile. In fact, even if a tile is moving past it, it'll be captured by the magnet. And sometimes that helps you solve levels too. You can solve levels with fewer magnets than you need hammers. All the way through, you can collect coins, and then you can exchange coins for hammers or for magnets or for bombs. And if you run out of coins, we have in-app purchases. And you can purchase coins, and they're not that expensive. You can purchase unlimited restarts, because by default, we limit you to 30 restarts per hour. And then once you run out of restarts, you can't play anymore until the next hour is up, and then you get 10 more restarts, and then you can play a bit more. If that's frustrating for you, I understand. $2.79 gets you unlimited restarts. It's not that much. Although then again, there are people who wouldn't pay anything for a game, so fine. And finally, you can buy everything, which is unlimited coins, unlimited restarts. Oh, one of the other options is no ads, because there are ads after every 10 games or so, or every 10 restarts. And if you buy everything, then once you buy everything, you don't need to buy anything again. All of the levels are guaranteed to be solvable without any extra stuff. So you don't need to have coins or magnets or bombs or hammers to solve any level. You could go through the whole thing, end to end, and solve every level. Having said that, some of the higher levels are getting rather tough. At some of the higher levels, it could take 7 to 10 moves to solve the level, and those moves are not at all intuitive. In order to design this, I have a solver. I wrote a solver in VisualWorks, fits into the user interface, so I can, in fact, let me show you that. Might as well demo it. I'll close this. Level designer, series editor. Okay, that's good. This is my level designer. I'm going to load one. I'll take Wicked Dwarf. That's fine. There. I don't have the fancy background. I don't need that for my own editor. But I can drop down hammers and bombs and magnets. I can drop down coins. I can drop down any of the tiles. I can put on a tile. Here's a 6. I'll put that on, and I'll put an egg on it. So that's an egg 6. Or I can delete that. And then for any of these levels, I can say, show me the solution. Okay, here's the solution for this one. You go left and down left, then left, then up right, then down right, then down left, up right, and right, and you'll solve it. That's guaranteed to be the fastest solution. There is no solution that's shorter. It uses what's called a breadth first search. So it will keep searching down until it finds one, and the first one that it finds, by definition, has to be the shortest one. So if you're clever enough to come up with this solution for it, then you don't need any tools or like magnets or bombs or hammers to solve it. Chances are you won't be able to figure this out unless you have your own solver, in which case it's not fun, really. And so you can use tools that are provided throughout the game, or you can purchase them. Let me show the solver. I don't know how long this will take. Solve. Doobie-doobie-doobie-doobie-doo. This is a hard one to solve because there are so many steps to the solution. Here it's finished. It said I found two solutions that are this long. So there are two ways of doing it with this number of steps. When I searched a little bit deeper, I didn't find any that required one more or two more steps, or even a few more steps. So this is a really hard level. This is why it's in the last one called Wicked Wharf. But you can imagine if you have hammers and bombs, you could move things around to line up the 6 with the 7. You could move and then nail it down. Then move things around to line up the 5 and then nail that down and finally get a solution. So with enough of those tools, you can solve this. But technically, you don't need to. Technically, it's possible to do it without. That's where we stand. Are there any questions about the system? If anybody's interested, I have those games running on about 4 devices right now. And I'd love people to play with them and give me feedback on what's easy and what's hard and so on. But you're more than welcome to play with these. Other questions?
You take statistics of the game as they play to measure things such as time per level to help you judge or coins spent per level, see which levels generate more money than others, that kind of thing.
I don't have any statistics right now. I do internally count the number of moves that you make to solve a level. And I do count the time required to solve the level, but I don't report those anywhere. I want to be really careful about sending data from a mobile device to anything that I have access to for privacy reasons. I really don't want to try and collect information from people, even if it's to improve the game. If I'm to do that, I really want to put up a message saying, no, we're going to send statistical information back to our server, and I don't really want to get into those complications. So I'm going to rely more on play testing under my control with people that I can interact with and get their impressions of it. And then after it's released, by feedback from users. But I'm really hesitant to just automatically collect information. It's just not something I want to be doing a whole lot of. And people are very sensitive about it for privacy concerns. This may not seem very, very important, but I just don't want to start collecting information without consent. Other questions? Thank you very much.